Creation had long been coming undone. Not that anyone would have known, everyone living and dying for their kingdom to come, everyone's faith in the throne. Ever since humankind had resisted a rest on creation's seventh day, they'd lost God's plot as their own progressed, keeping God's love at bay. One century after another, they slayed sisters and brothers, ignoring God's love story scripts, their depravity growing and gravity unsewing creation's days 1 through 6. The sixth-day creation of human life they undid with their constant war and strife. And when God went in as love in skin to be one with the one he wooed, humankind couldn't handle the man, his scandals, or the stories he construed. The green gifts God gave on day 5 for food, the humans now use to feed their feuds. And day 4's separated light, love-spun stars hung for strolls at night, the humans now use to navigate seas, searching for riches in land to seize. The dry brown ground that on day 3 crowned, they now conquered, scraped, dug, and mined, extracting more metals so when war dust settles, their kings could take things in kind. Day 2's sky, once painted blue with angel sighs, dance floor by day and bed by night, they filled with gods who were always at odds, purportedly protecting their might. And so they undid back to day 1, before the fabric of being was spun, when a spirit of love hovered above the surface of the deep, dreaming of beings to reflect the all-seeing, forever to have, hold, and keep. And when nothing was left but God's dream to undo, Spirit stepped in human skin, to teach, to rescue, to woo. Through the warm, wet walls of a watery womb, he penetrated the world to woo as a groom his plot-lost people who fought over land, fought over dirt, rock, sea, and sand, and over moist river valleys where seeds best bloom, to rise, live, and die, for more to consume. He joined humans who built on the bruised backs of slaves to claim more fields and plant more grains, reap higher yields, dig more graves, cultivate more plots to kill, more fields of thought for good or ill, always redundant, always assuming that life's made abundant by over-consuming. And now Caesar was the man currently enslaved to gorging on the lands of the vanquished saved, conducting military missions to civilize savages by his war-sworn sword with all of its ravages, breaking bones and fixing knees to bend towards Rome in the lands he seized. Dining day and noshing night, the empire slew and grew, indifferent to death, vile, bereft, bloated, and blood-red in hue. And all sorts of people followed suit, designing dimensions of consumption's pursuit. They built temples that gorged on unblemished lambs, sheep, goats, and bulls, turtle doves, and rams. A dozen they'd breed for an unblemished one to give to the god of the water or sun, or the god of it all, wooing the ones who could keep love's story from coming undone. You see, there'd been no other way but to let them explore all their stories of sacrifice, consumption, and war, land and lost, governments and gods, temples, religions, and more than their share of sacrificed pigeons. But then, of all the unthinkable things God incarnate could do for a bride who he'd always wanted to woo, he allowed his body to be nailed to a tree, there to hang listlessly, subject to the sun and air and water if it rained, the sun and air of all human pain. Then, done dying, his last words spoken, his mother crying, his pierced heart broken, disciples disgraced by a death too soon. His body was wound in linen and bound in a burial cloth cocoon. Now, how a cocoon is spun and what happens in one is not often well understood. But a body in a cocoon, like a seed in the earth, is a clue to what looms for a world's rebirth, a way God shows He is good. A caterpillar like Rome will consume its home, eating every green plant for food, always ingesting, forever digesting, enslaved to consumption and never resting. Its cells all bloat and feud. They fight one another like Cain's killing Abel's till violence smothers and they become unstable, soaked in blood in which they'll drown unless they turn their consumption down. Then, of all the things a caterpillar could do when his life-eating leaves is finally through, he nails his body to a tree, there to hang listlessly, subject to the sun and air and water if it rains, the sun and air of metamorphosis pains. He grows hungry and thirsty, a stranger alone, forsaken by God in a silk-spun home, and dies in prison, wrapped inside a burial linen. For days in death's throes she'll decompose, out of sight where we cannot see, a spirit of love hovering above the surface of the deep on a tree. Then, just when things look darkest for the caterpillar carcass, tomb turns to womb and creation resumes, refined as designed by the artist. Diverse groups of cells from various parts gather together to practice their arts. One group has vision and learns it's an eye, another a wing with which to fly, another an antenna, and another one too, all submitting to the Spirit who's making things new. But to the old creation such cells are enemies, so it lashes back with antibodies. But what the immune system believed to be just an infection turns out to be something new conceived, a resurrection. The new cells devise to love and to spread, and together they rise like yeast and bread. Then once the old body can't rule by whips and blows, its blood will pool and decompose. The old body becomes the new culture medium, fearing the new cells, but inadvertently feeding them, never even knowing that the new thing growing won't stand for its old violent tedium. As the old body's rot feeds the new thing's plot, new cells, imaginal cells they're called, gather together, grow and get better, finding life within silk-thin walls. Then one day old bonds are broken, new being, new way, a cocoon cracks open, a new thing emerges, a bride takes flight, and love resurges with new kinds of might. The beloved becomes a butterfly, tapping her wings on God's good sky, never again to fight over leaves. Love nectar enough for her Adams and Eves. And that is how an artist redeems even the tiniest universe with the tiniest dreams by going inside and sowing spirit to guide from within as well as without, displaying God's love as it's always been, abundant, relentless, devout. So 7 weeks and a day from that Passover cross, Jews gathered again for Pentecost, a feast of the harvest, honoring God's design, that a seed's broken body yields bread in time. During Passover, they'd remembered rebirth through a Red Sea canal. At Pentecost, they'd recall their mountaintop vow, capillary lights across a womb wall sky, the day they were wed with God on Sinai. And gathered around a table again, the disciples heard a sound like violent wind or a cocoon torn open by light. This was the hour God clothed them in power, and as promised, it came with might. They saw something like tongues of fire descend on them each, felt Spirit inspire and pour out in speech as they all spoke as one with love-drunk tongues, intoxicated with something to teach. All the elements were aligning for a big plot turn. Thunder, wind, lightning, and hearts that burn. All of the elements, except for one. Searching for water, we at first find none. But in each story section, there had always been water to bear God's reflection to his sons and daughters. A parting sea, a river healing leprosy, or a cloud that would lead them somehow. But the only water this time was living inside. The humans were the water now. There were Parthians, Medes, and Cappadocians, all under the spell of Spirit's devotion, sisters and brothers from other continents and nations, Elamites, Africans, Arabs, and Asians, Romans and Libyans from overseas, and Egyptian former enemies, each understanding in their own native tongue. The story that God through Galilee had spun of people who were brown, yellow, black, and white, all one body in God's good sight. Their young saw visions and their old dreamt dreams, and they all broke bread and shared their things. Gentile, Jew, rich and poor dined together, one body renewed by Spirit to weather the whips and scorns they knew would come as the old creation was coming undone. And naturally, the body of the old creation, heads of state and arms of nations, didn't recognize this new thing as its own. So they slaughtered its cells and conjured hells by sword, spear, cross, and stone. They fed people to beasts and burned them at the stake, all to keep the Roman peace, even though that peace was fake. But forgiving its foes, the new creation grew stronger, and blessing all those who would constantly wrong her, she grew each day in joy and wonder, God at play among cells who once slumbered. And with God as King, people found new ways of being, new ways of loving, living, and seeing. Poor widows were fed and by love led to a future where God and his bride were wed. And with love as their guide, God's love story scribes picked up their pens again, and with a new love lens recorded all the mysteries, letters, visions, and histories of reclaiming their world from death and sin and living in the love story they found themselves in. And to this day, each time God's image is born into skin, we're invited to envision being born again and tapping our wings on God's good sky to the tune God sings of a butterfly. Each of us a cell in a body made new, each a story to tell, a thing to do, each cell free to get engaged and pursue God's glee with a wedding to stage, free to hear what creation's always sung with its song, that we've been the butterflies in God's stomach all along.